Hey, welcome back, Trevor Crow, Trevor and Friends. This is WGCH. You can listen live stream on WGCH.com. And on Zoom right now, we have a debut author, Kate Barad, who has written a book called Greenwich, which it was quite the page turner. I read it this summer and I couldn't put it down and I had to contact her. Just a little bit, it's a riveting debut novel. She's been reviewed by People Magazine, Amazon Editor's Pick, Best Fiction and Literature by Vanity Fair Summer Reading. It goes on and on. So you can find her at katebroad.com. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad. And by the way, I really could not put your book down. It was really riveting. So kind of jump in with me a little bit here. Why Greenwich? And and there are many themes in here, from power to privilege to race to who gets redemption, if that's ever possible.
Mhm.
Talk to me how this came to you.
Well, yeah, you're right. There's so many threads and so many pieces that are going on, and I guess for listeners, it's about a woman who's looking back on this summer that she's 17. She's just graduated from high school. She's about to start college. She's about to sort of start what she thinks will be the rest of her life, and she spends the summer staying with her very, very wealthy aunt and uncle in Greenwich, Connecticut. And while she's there, an accident happens, and so the book is sort of about the build up to that accident, but also really about the consequences and what comes next. Um, and once I started with this idea of this girl kind of at this pivotal moment in her life, this kind of coming of age novel where she would be away from home and thrust into this new environment. And as I started thinking about, like you were saying, all of these threads of the story, this book about privilege, about consequences, I started imagining kind of building up this family where her aunt and uncle, it's set in 1999, and her aunt and uncle have recently moved to Greenwich from New York City. So everyone in this book is an outsider. Like, no one in the book is from Greenwich, and that started to feel really important. I was thinking about her uncle works for a hedge fund company, which sort of it plays an essential role in the story. And as I was pulling all of these pieces together, thinking about, what jobs do they have? What is going on in this time period? Greenwich just felt like the perfect setting for it. And then it felt like the perfect title for the book too. For a while, I was just writing the novel, and then I was sort of like, what if I just called it Greenwich? Like, I feel like when I say
Mhm.
that, people know, and especially when you see the cover, it's got this kind of perfect manicured lawn and giant house on the front, but also this sort of ominous drip and like a splatter on it. And so you get this sense like something bad happens here. And I thought Greenwich pulled all of these pieces together where we know there's going to be wealth, there's going to be privilege, there's going to be this teenager stepping into this sort of incredible estate. And then the question becomes like, how does it all fall apart?
So there's some very interesting characters in the book.
Mhm.
One of which of course, I could connect with. Her name's Ellen. She's the
Mhm.
aunt. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of Ellen in your mind. Is this somebody you know, or somebody similar to somebody you might have grown up with? Like, talk to me about
There's
Ellen.
Yeah, Ellen is such a character. She's so none of the characters are based on a specific person. It's not like, oh, I know this person, and so I'm gonna write them into the book as Aunt Ellen. But I do feel like a lot of these characters are very recognizable. They're very familiar. I feel like I know Aunt Ellen, even if I don't. Even if she's fictional, and yet she's so like the way that she talks, the way that she does her hair. She's extremely put together. She's extremely glamorous. She doesn't come from money, but I think you wouldn't know it if you meet her. And she's very ambitious. And I was thinking a lot about the ways that women wield power, and the ways that women sort of have power but also don't have power. And that was a lot of what was informing how I thought of her character. She's in the book, she's recently had an accident. She's fallen off a horse, and she has a 3-year-old daughter. And although she has a live in babysitter, she needs extra help. And that's part of what sends Rachel, the 17-year-old protagonist, to her house. And so, kind of setting up what Ellen's life was like, I felt like she was one of the first characters actually who really came to me. Like, I just just felt like I can hear her voice. Like I know exactly who she is.
No, I definitely could feel her energy and her presence. And she's a wife, she's a mother. She's also a career woman.
Mm-hmm.
She has influence in these different ways. And then, of course, she doesn't. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, this really did expand or sort of because it's set in 1999, we're running into the 2000s and where are women's uh, roles. And you are an alum of Wellesley College, as am I,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Oh,
just
yes.
love. And that we have that in common. And again, we have these three women and then a child, and they're all in this dance. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the other important character, Claudia?
I love the way you describe that as they're in this dance because it is they're all in this house together for the summer, and so it's very constrained, sort of the setting and all of these personalities that come up against each other. So we have Rachel, the protagonist, we have her aunt Ellen, and then Claudia is the live-in babysitter who has been hired to watch Ellen's daughter, who's 3. Claudia she grew up in Hartford, so she's the native Connecticut nutmegger, and she is 21. She's just graduated from college. She wants to be an artist. She's a young Black woman. This family is white, and that's a very important part of the book. That they have hired this woman of color to do a lot of the labor in the household that then allows Ellen to sort of have her life and her go to her fundraisers and kind of have her career. And Claudia really came to me as she is so great with kids. She's so great with the family, but she's in a really tricky position throughout the whole book. She gets the job because her older sister works with Ellen at an advertising firm in New York, and she, similarly to Rachel, she's in this really like pivotal moment in her life because she's just graduated. She's figuring out how to be an artist, which is always the question, right? Like, how do I make a life from this? And she comes to Greenwich, also from the outside, and all of her friends have scattered and are doing different things. And you can sort of feel in the beginning, I think, how lonely she is, or she might not even sort of even realize fully how lonely she is until Rachel comes along and suddenly she has someone else who's close to her age who she can talk to and who she can connect with. And that becomes a really big driving force of the story is the connection that these two young women share, and the time that they spend together. They're caring for Rachel's cousin, but it's also really about their relationship. And a lot of what they talk about is the future. You know, what do they want to do when they grow up? What are the next steps in their lives look like? And Rachel, when she first sees Claudia's art, you know, has this really strong conviction of like this woman is going places. This woman really has it, and it makes Rachel kind of question her own life too about what does she have if she doesn't have a talent like that.
Well, this convergence, if you will, of all these
Mm-hmm.
moments in these people's lives and futures, et cetera, really clashes and impacts each of them in different and very difficult and tough ways. How did you conceptualize all of that?
There are so many moving parts. Yeah, there's a way in which the book kind of builds. We get this like sticky summer feeling. I wanted the book to feel like August in New England. This kind of like buildup of heat. You can kind of smell the fresh cut grass. There's a way in which on the surface everything is sort of just going along, and then under the surface you get all of those really deep tensions or the sort of cold water that's bubbling up from underneath. And I kept building the story just thinking about all of these strands and what I could do with them. So I went into it knowing that there was going to be this accident, and I won't tell people exactly what it is. We will
No,
save
can't
the
say it.
spoilers, but you know
Uh-huh.
from page 1 something happens, and that all of these people are implicated, and that Rachel has made a decision, and possibly a mistake that she is reckoning with years later. And so that was kind of my starting point, was to say, I know something is going to happen in this family, and I know that everyone's roles are going to come to play a really pivotal part in kind of the position that they take around this accident. It's hard to talk about without sort of giving those spoilers, but I think that kind of sets it up. Like everyone, kind of from page one, it's you're sort of watching this train wreck almost
Mm.
unfold, and you know where it's going, but you also really don't know where it's going. And I think that's part of it too, is just how it all unfolds in unanticipated ways.
Well, one of the things that set the stage, at least for me, was this right early on, as Rachel arrives at the property in this beautiful mansion, there's a dead deer
Mm-hmm.
in the water right there, and that is I did see a description about your book called sort of calling it gothic, and it did
Mm-hmm.
have that from that moment on, this feeling of, oh, there's something unsettling happening. We have to prepare, and what's it going to be? But I think what I love of your storytelling is you weave these pieces and parts together, and each of these people really do feel like you know them, including Laurent. He's the
Mm-hmm.
really the one man pretty much in the story. Talk to me about how you conceptualized him, because he's so perfect for his part.
Oh, good. I love hearing that. Yeah, Laurent is Rachel's uncle. He's married to Ellen. And he's French, as you may guess from his name. So also an outsider, but came to the U.S. and is very ambitious. He is the hedge fund guy, and he has been trying to set up a new real estate deal along the Greenwich waterfront. And that was one of the big parts about that sort of came through in choosing to set it in Connecticut, in Greenwich, and in the late 90s of this time of tremendous growth. I wound up doing a lot more research than I had ever anticipated, sort of about that time period and watersheds and all of the politics around real estate and building in Greenwich, which was actually very interesting. And without giving too much away, Laurent is into some questionable business
Mm,
dealings. Because he is trying to push this deal through really by any means possible, and that becomes something that's recurring in the book, is how far will each of these characters go to protect themselves and to protect their family. And Laurent's really the one who is kind of in deepest from the beginning about what will he do in order to make this deal work. And it was interesting developing his character because he's so central to the story, and yet he's not around for a lot of it. He's kind of looms over the house,
mm,
but he's not there in the day to day the way that we were talking about. Like, it's so much about Rachel and Claudia's cousin Sabine, and then Ellen is kind of flitting in and out, and Laurent is a lot of times he's not on the page, and yet I think you sort of feel him in
mhm,
everything. And then when he is in the picture, he really dominates every scene in the way of, a sort of brash, bombastic, very wealthy man who is used to calling the shots. And then when this accident happens, it's something that's out of his control. And I think we see him kind of trying to take back control, and trying
mhm,
to figure out, like, what do you do when life happens. He was someone, Ellen really came to me right from the start, and I kind of had her character in mind. And he was someone who I really had to go back and continue to push more,
mm.
to do that research, to really understand, like, what is he working on and what is the problem with it and what does Rachel know about it or not know, and kind of what is driving him. Because I wanted him to feel, I wanted all of the characters to feel very complex and very real. So no one is just a villain and no one is just a good character. But with him, that was a little bit tricky
Yeah, he was.
sometimes.
It's still hard to see a lot of redeeming
Yes,
qualities there,
yes.
but but he is ambitious, and he's ambitious for his family. And I think in this moment right now, we're in this sort of alternative facts kind of world, or post-truth world.
Hmm.
And what he does is his ability to start molding and stretching what happened,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And how this book is actually relevant today, even though it was set up in the 1990 late 90s, the last year of the 90s, in fact. How you perceive this as part of what our reality today in this moment.
Yeah, that was a big. part of this writing process. And it's funny, there's a way, like I hear the book talked about, and it's called historical fiction, which makes me feel ancient, but then it also gets talked about as contemporary fiction. And
Mhm.
it feels very contemporary. And it was interesting going through it and realizing like I had to do a certain amount of kind of historical research to really set the stage to think about what was happening in this time period. You know, what was Rachel listening to on her Walkman or her Discman? Like, and she doesn't have a cell phone. She doesn't have, there's no social media. She's talking to her friends back home on AIM. And yet at the same time, I feel like a big part of the book is, like you're saying, not a lot has changed. Or you have to sort of question, well, what has changed in terms of the politics, in terms of the way that we talk about privilege and race in this country? Could what happened in this novel still happen today? Would things be different around the public response to the accident? And I wanted the book to raise those types of questions and to kind of inspire, I hope, the reader to ask that too, to say, well, what has changed and what hasn't changed? And a lot of these things are based on real events, real historical events. Not that I didn't take anything wholesale, but it's all kind of like straight from the headlines. There's actually not a lot that I totally made up.
Mm.
And that also, you know, I kept asking myself, like, could this keep happening? And I think the answer is that it could. I mean, I think when you
Mhm.
talk about, for instance, being in a kind of post-truth moment now, and which the even the idea of truth feels like it no longer exists, that doesn't just spring up out of nowhere, or it doesn't just spontaneously emerge in 2016. Like there has to be a build up to it, and you have to we kind of see what people will swallow and allow first before you can push it farther and farther. And so I was thinking a lot about how our kind of contemporary moment still has its root in the 90s. You know, how are we talking about race in the 90s? How are we talking about class and labor and gender and privilege? And again, you know, I just keep saying it, like what changed and what hasn't.
I know I have this feeling that it really hasn't changed
Yeah.
much, but just even personally. So I grew up in Boston. My
Me
parents
too.
live in Cambridge.
Okay. Yeah.
I ran for state senate. There's so many parallels for me personally, and I
Mm-hmm.
live right on the water. I live on the Mianus River, so every piece of this book kept coming up to me, going, "Oh my gosh, this is so familiar! This is so familiar." So I thoroughly ate it up. I was really enjoying myself, and these parts of race, power, privilege, who gets to tell the story,
Mm-hmm.
who gets to have redemption if there's such a thing. And I'm not even sure I get the feeling there is in the long run. I don't know what's your feeling on that. Do you ever get to be forgiven? I don't
I,
know.
that's such a big question in the novel, and it's something, I mean, this is not a novel that like wraps everything up with a little bow, right?
No,
I did
there's no
not,
bow here.
no bow here. Sorry to disappoint. It's really because it is about that question, and I think readers have different answers, and that's one of the
Mm,
things that's so wonderful about a book is that the reader also, there's what I put on the page, but the reader also brings their own experiences and their own interpretations, and people will say, well, here's this line and that's what it's saying, but what about here's this other line and that's what it's saying. I'm going to a book club tonight as a sort of guest because they read Greenwich for it, and I'm really excited to hear like what will their take on the ending be, because I know that people have a lot of different thoughts about it. And you know, I don't have a clear answer either that says, well, this is what forgiveness looks like, or this is what's forgivable, and this is what isn't forgivable. But I certainly wanted to raise the question of, are there things that are not forgivable? And what would forgiveness look like? Does one have to be forgiven? Um, I think that there's often a kind of narrative that says, well, you have to forgive someone so that you can move on.
mhm.
And I think in this book, as far as Claudia, like I don't think that that's true for Claudia. Again, sort of not giving spoilers, but I think that there is a way that Claudia can move on, also without having to provide forgiveness. So it becomes a very sticky question. But I am really glad that it rang true and that it raised these questions and that all of those things around, you know, the setting and the time period. I'm from outside Boston as well, and so and I wanted to make Rachel, she grows up in Cambridge, and make her from that area as well. In part because it's familiar, and in part because I don't know if you feel this way from having grown up. I feel like Massachusetts is held as such a sort of bastion of like it's so liberal and it's so progressive. And that is sort of true and also sort of not. And so I wanted Rachel as a problematic, complicated character, let's say, and I felt like it was very important to make her, I wanted her to be from Massachusetts, so you can't just dismiss her and say, well, if she were from a different place or a different time period, she would have different views. I feel like these are views that are pervasive everywhere.
Absolutely agree. I have to say I finished the book and I needed a couple weeks actually to sort of
Mhm.
process it. Because like you're saying, there are no pretty neat little pink bows at the
Yeah.
end of the story. Yet each of these characters rang true. They each of they made me start asking more questions like was this in and again the idea of fairness, truth,
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness, and that my show is literally about relationships and on the side politics, so this kind of
Mm-hmm.
wraps it all up
All
in
of
so many
those.
ways, all of
Yeah.
those ways. But yeah, and it shows how messy, um both ugly and at times beautiful our humanity really
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm. I love that way of putting it, and that's exactly what I wanted to write. There is a way, I mean, these are characters who hurt each other, and there's a line in the book where Rachel she becomes a trauma surgeon, and later as an adult, she sort of realized, she says there are so many different kinds of pain, and that's a line that I feel like sums up a lot of the book. There are ways in which these characters hurt each other, and it becomes this question of like, why do people who love each other hurt each other? Or why do we sometimes hurt the people we love the most? And why do we struggle to form these connections when that's what we really want? To have with other people. And there is that ugly side of it, but also, like you say, it's also really beautiful. I mean, I think there's something so important in the striving, in the humanity of it, in reading about and inhabiting characters who are flawed and make mistakes, but are also still trying to find their way through it. And I wanted all of those things to come across. I've heard a lot of people use the word messy, and so that's become kind of a favorite way of describing it. And I think that's pretty accurate. It's messy, but it's like, what part of life is not?
So true. And one of the characters that I loved as well is Rachel's mom, or and
Mm-hmm.
Ellen's sister. She did seem to be the one, kind of like just loving, straightforward, pretty much across the board. She was sort of more the easier person to digest, if you will. Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear you say that, because I think of her as really absent.
She
Um,
was, but maybe
yeah,
that's
and sort of
why.
maybe that's why, right? We don't see as much of her. I mean, part of where I think Rachel gets into trouble in this book is that there's not a lot of adult support, and there's a
hmm
way in which Rachel is certainly old enough to know better. Like, she's 17 and then 18. She's not a child, but at the same time, like, she's a teenager, and she is saddled with a lot of adult responsibilities, and there's sort of a question of like, is she ready for that? And how should she handle things differently? And I do feel like her mom is very wrapped up in other things. There's a kind of subplot with going on with Rachel's sister. And it does sometimes feel like, oh, if these people could just get on the phone and have a deeply
Mm,
meaningful conversation about how they're really feeling. But nobody has those kinds of tools in their toolbox.
no,
And
no.
so it is a really interesting question about Rachel's parents. I think that they're trying their best.
hmm
I'm kind of compared, especially to Ellen and Laurent. I think that their hearts are in a better place, but I also think they don't really know the extent of everything that's going on inside this house in Greenwich, and Rachel comes to feel like she can't turn to them for support in a way that
hmm
she might wish that she could.
Yeah, and that is such a great message out there. And again, as a therapist, if you
Mm-hmm.
can access those people, the people who love you, and be able to say, "Look, I'm really struggling right now. This
Mm-hmm.
is a much rougher
Mm-hmm.
summer than I was expecting, and mom, help me out," or dad, like I really need a good long conversation. Absolutely. And many of us don't have the tools. And I would hope that today, and especially now, I became a therapist in 2006, and even back then, we really didn't talk much about attachment theory or
Mm-hmm.
being able to say like I'm needing this emotional bonding. I grew up in a time where that was not really a thing. You were just supposed to get up
Right.
and go do whatever you're supposed to do and finish it, for heaven's sake,
Right.
um, regardless of how painful it was. So yeah, I love this. There's a coming of age, but of a turn of the century. Again, our roles, which really ultimately as women haven't truly changed all that much, I don't
Hmm.
believe, between work, parenting, being a spouse, etc. That it's I wish I could say really things are so different and we've come so far, but I actually think that that sticky summer feel hasn't left us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the hard things in the novel. One of the sort of hard truths is that you want to say, well, this is so different, but I think when you take a hard look at it, it really isn't. And these questions also about how how do we ask for help? How do we support each other? How do we
Mhm.
connect with other people? I mean, those are, we have a lot more therapy, and yet those are still kind of constant questions. I don't think those questions are going
They're not going
anywhere. And
away.
the way in which, for
So, Kate,
Rachel,
I'm going to
yeah,
have to interrupt you and I'm going to
yes,
thank you so much because we
thank
have to
you.
wrap it up. That went way too fast. I have so much
I
more to talk
know.
to you about, but thank you for being on the show. And I want my book group to read this book and have more conversations.
I
So,
hope they
thank you.
do.
Excellent job, everybody out there. Read Greenwich by Kate Broad. Thank you. Have a great week. It's Trevor Crow, Trevor and Friends, WGCH. Bye.